Thank you all so much for being here this evening, and welcome to Green Drinks. This event is organized by Berkshire Environmental Action Team, also known as BEAT. Many of you probably already know about us, but in case you don't, you can learn a lot more on thebeatnews.org. Also on our website, we make it pretty easy to stay up to date and just in the know about many environmental happenings taking place in the community and Massachusetts and even regionally. So we have this community calendar where we compile events and other programs that organizations and individuals send us. And then we have this environmental jobs board. And then we have the environmental monitor, where we go through the state's environmental monitor twice a month and put a list together of all the really big projects taking place that we should all be keeping an eye on. And then every week we update our public notices page, and that's public notices that are featured in local newspapers for Franklin, Hampshire, Hampton, Berkshire counties that we list. And they're mostly Conservation Commission meetings, but there are also other environmentally relevant ones there as well. So BEAT is a 501c3 nonprofit, so that means all of our funding comes from grants and donations. So programs like this one are only possible thanks to those who support BEAT and donate to BEAT. And if you would like to donate to BEAT, you can do so by going to this donate page on our website, and there are several ways to support us. And thank you. And then very briefly, I just wanted to highlight the next 3 months of Berkshire Green Drinks. So next month, we will have our annual update where all of the BEAT staff will just talk about everything we've been up to for the past year and what we look forward to as the new year approaches. And that's Wednesday, December 11th, and it'll be at 6 p.m. and it's online only. And then in January, we are back to hybrid, and Nate Buckhout, a Mass Wildlife biologist, will be talking about bears. Many of you may remember Nate talking about mustelids back in, I think, March 2023. And that will take place at the stationary factory in Dalton, but it'll also be live streamed on Zoom. And then in February, we will have only virtual Berkshire Green Drinks, and Shelby Perry from the Northeast Wilderness Trust is coming to talk about slime molds. And I think that's all I have, so I am going to hand it over to Rose, our speaker this evening. Just stop sharing my screen here. All right, Rose, it's all yours.
I'm Rose Wessel. I'm Program Director for No Fracked Gas in Mass, which is a program of Berkshire Environmental Action Team. And we started out fighting new proposal fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines, LNG facilities, and so on. But the last few years, we've been taking on peaker power plants. They're a particular type of power plant that we'll be talking about tonight. And there's some real great possibilities in Pittsfield regarding our peaker plants. So I'll share my screen. Let's see, desktop number 2. Great. We're going to be taking a look at alternatives to these peaker power plants. So Pittsfield, I'm not originally from Pittsfield, but I've lived in the area for the last 22 years, and I've really come to get a feel for the history of Pittsfield. A lot of people think, oh, a lot of industry left, but what's really amazing about Pittsfield is it has a long history of innovation. It was a lot of technological innovation regarding electrical transformers. The first one was invented in Pittsfield in 1891. That was by Stanley Electric Manufacturing. GE bought out Stanley in 1903. They started plastics research in Pittsfield in 1909. By the 1930s and 40s, there were over 13,000 people working in GE, mostly because of the growth in transformer technology and aerospace technology. So there's a long history here of innovation. The problem is, when GE picked up stakes, a lot of stuff kind of stalled. And there are a lot of folks now talking about attracting new technology to the area. There's a lot of talk about establishing a clean tech corridor, attracting companies that work in clean energy or in biomedical research. And we still have some old relics sitting around. Mainly Pittsfield Generating is an old fossil fuel peaker power plant that's been there for quite some time. And it might be in the interest of the city to leave behind yesterday's technology and start looking at what a clean energy future might look like by replacing it. Decarbonizing our last peaker power plant could show that Pittsfield is forward-looking, an environmentally minded place that's friendly to the natural surroundings. Um, Environmental tourism is a big part of Pittsfield, and it makes sense to get rid of this last bit of fossil fuel technology that's still hanging around. So peaker power plants, these are the power plants that come on when the grid is already maxed out. All of the regular baseload plants that supply energy are running at full tilt. And when it's really hot and everyone turns on their air conditioner, and when it's really cold and they're competing with home heating for gas, that's when these peaker plants start to come on. They only run a very few hours, only a few days a year. It's usually about 4 hours, usually in the hottest weather. Sometimes it comes on in a real cold polar snap. Generally, they run 5% of the time or less. Pittsfield Generating, last time we talked to them, said that they run about 2% of the time currently. But the problem is when they run, they produce a lot of pollution per megawatt of what they produce. So since these tend to be very short run times, that short-term demand can be met by battery energy storage systems that's charged during the non-peak hours, ideally using renewable energy. If you take a look at a kind of a standard grid day, this doesn't look completely like what we encounter in New England. Our low production tends to go more towards the middle of the day because we have quite a bit of solar running. But ideally, what happens is you charge when demand is low, and then you discharge the batteries when the peak is really high. That way you avoid having to fire up these fossil fuel power plants. Pittsfield Generating is also located right in the middle of the city. It's less than, excuse me, less than 1,000 feet to Allendale Elementary School. Folks that are familiar with the area also know that this mound in between the power plant and the school is the toxic waste dump, basically, PCB dumps from GE. So they really get a double whammy having that pollution and the dumps right there. It's also close to other elementary schools. And until recently, there was another peaker plant right nearby at the end of Doreen Street. It's really hard to see from Doreen Street, so a lot of people didn't know it was there, but it's right up against that neighborhood. Um, Allendale and the east side of Morningside are all within 3 miles. West side is within 5 miles, so it's really close to those environmental justice neighborhoods. And that has health impacts. Um, Health impacts of fossil fuel emissions. Um, it's the effects of PM 2.5, which actually we're starting to see with the wildfire smoke as well. It's very similar. It can aggravate asthma, COPD, cardiovascular disease, can contribute to preterm birth or premature death. It's children and elderly that are really the most vulnerable to these kinds of emissions. It's fine particulate matter. It's nitrous oxides and sulfur oxides that are in this pollution. It causes cellular damage, inflammation, can increase comorbidities of COVID-19. And for that reason, the Pittsfield Board of Health sent a letter of concern to the owners of Pittsfield Generating, asking them to consider transitioning to storage and renewables. One of the things that made us interested in the impacts of these power plants was the difference in life expectancy between different neighborhoods in Pittsfield. If you look at Morningside, compared to the southeast, it's a life expectancy of 10 to 12 years less. um, if you live in the middle of the city. And granted, there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. There's socioeconomic factors, access to nutrition, but there's also pollution. And it's from traffic too, but it's also from sources like power plants. And this is something that we can do something about. We can remove at least one of those burdens by transitioning this power plant. It raised community concern. It was concerns over public health and the environment that compelled over 300 people to sign a petition. You still can sign it today if you want to. Dozens came to standout protests. At that point, we were trying to press the owners of Pittsfield Generating to come to the table to speak with us. The owners of the Doreen Street plant came to talk with us right away. And when we said, we'd like to see you decarbonize, they said, yeah, you're right, we should be doing that. So they retired the Doreen Street plant and the one in Lee and one in West Springfield already 2 years ago. And they're transitioning the West Springfield plant to storage and renewables. We're still talking with Hull Street, um, but they did come to the table after that round of protests. The stats on Pittsfield Generating are really interesting. There's only 2 crew members that work there on a regular basis. 98% of the time, it's just 2 people. When it does run, the 2% of the time that it does run, there's up to 6 people that work there. So it's not a huge labor force. I mean, granted, we don't want to see any jobs lost, but that's a very small amount. People see a big power plant and often think it's a good 10, 15 person kind of crew, and it's fairly small. So we could even help those people transition to other jobs. Um, Currently, they pay 693,000 in taxes to the city, but they recently appealed to the state board to lower their tax bill because of depreciation. The new payment moving forward is going to be around 350,000 instead. So being a big part of the Pittsfield tax base, that's starting to dwindle. So at a time when it's an aging plant, they're more likely to produce more pollution per megawatt. They're actually paying less to the city at that point. And we had this talk with the mayor back in March. Is it appropriate that a facility that is a major source of pollution was awarded a tax cut at the time when they're likely to increase their emissions? And we wondered if there's any way that the city could incentivize non-emitting alternatives like battery storage. The benefits of transitioning a power plant are many. Excuse me. Um, it keeps the plant on the tax rolls for longer. One of the dangers of having an aging plant in place is that they will just let it run out until it dies, basically. Excuse me. And that's what happened to our trash burning plant. It just kept running and malfunctioning until it just fell apart and somebody else bought it out. Um, we would hate to see that source of income disappear for the city. It would also keep the tax base higher because it would be new technology rather than old depreciated fossil fuel technology. So it ideally could contribute more like it used to back to the tax rolls in the city. It's in an ideal location, converting an already industrial zone with an existing interconnection to the grid in place. There would be no need for additional land acquisition or forest destruction needed for, putting up a large solar array. Um, it also, above all, improves the local health outcomes for the community if this plant would transition to renewables and storage. And it could make a really great point for clean tech development from an economic development point of view. It updates the image of the city as being more green. It upholds the values of the clean tech companies and renewable energy companies that we're hoping to attract to the area. And it could possibly, I mean, this is a large ask, but it could possibly provide steam service. Um, Pittsfield Generating used to be a combined heat and power plant that supplied steam to GE and I believe General Dynamics as well. There were steam loops that went to those manufacturing facilities. And that could happen again. It could be a desirable asset for manufacturing, pharmaceutical, research and development. Um, there is a way to do that with non-emitting sources. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. There may be more time for it in the Q&A, but there's a great example of this happening out in Cambridge. So there are several ways that it could decarbonize. One of the easiest ways is to simply add storage to the existing operations. It's on a very small lot, but there are other GE properties. They're currently renting that lot from GE, and there are other GE properties nearby where they could put storage. That could effectively replace fossil fuel generation, stopping emissions while extending the lifespan of its operation and preserving the tax base. Um, they could also retire the plant, dismantle it, and use those 6 acres for storage. That would definitely meet the needs that the space needs that they have. And it could completely replace fossil fuel generation, no chance of it ever running again. And there could be more space if needed, but 6 acres should take care of a lot of it. There's another possibility of, let me get my things here, of retiring the fossil fuel turbines and convert to storage and solar. This is where more space would be needed. And this is where maybe the city could help if they wanted to participate in making this possible. There are other lots nearby, just on the other side of New York Avenue, that have recently come open. Those could be solar fields. They may be hard to disturb land because the old GE plants have been buried in those properties and capped over. It may be hard to dig into those properties to build anything else. Solar is an ideal use for that kind of a space. The Mass Clean Peak standard also allows generation to be off-site or owned by another party with whom they have a power purchase agreement. So if there's solar set up, it could be run by the city, or it could be an arrangement with the city to lease land to the power plant. There are a lot of different ways that this could happen, that they could partner with them to help make it happen. And that's one of the frustrations that the owners of the plant have been talking about is they would like to have more options. They've looked around and they haven't found a way to quite make it work. And we really think talking with the city to see how the transition could happen would really help. So that leaves us with the question, how could the city help make a transition away from fossil fuel happen? Is there room to develop solar to supply to the plant? Could the city own that solar and sell the power to the plant, or could they lease the land to the plant? Can a new steam loop be constructed similar to the former GE steam supply? As I mentioned, there's already a sample of that happening in Cambridge where they're converting to it's a trademark name, it's their name, E-Steam, and it's electric generated steam loop to supply district heat. That is another possibility given the existing steam turbines in the plant. And as you can see, Pittsfield Generating, there's an open GE lot right next to it where they could do some extra battery storage. And then these two buildings were just removed by, the old GE buildings were just removed, leaving these acres of land available as well. So there is areas right nearby that could serve that purpose. There's also the interconnection to the grid is right in between the two. So it's really close to existing infrastructure, which makes it much easier to get it approved and avoids build out of a lot more infrastructure to connect it to the grid. Yeah, we've mostly talked about that. One of the ideas that we hadn't talked about yet is maybe a community-owned municipal power takeover. I don't know if the city has the capacity for that. It would be great to talk to the city council and see what they think of that, but that's another possibility. And one of the things that got us thinking in that direction is there are funding opportunities that are available, mostly because of the Inflation Reduction Act. There were a couple of grant opportunities that just passed by. Um, like I said, we spoke to the mayor back in the spring, and I guess he just didn't have the capacity to dive into it with us. But there's the EPA Environmental and Climate Justice Community Change Grants Program, which could have lent about 10 million or so to the city or granted about 10 million or so to the city to help develop clean energy technology within the city, mostly to make sure to lower impact to environmental justice communities. And there's also the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program. Again, they just passed by, but there may be more grant programs in the future. Woods Mackenzie just announced a bunch more, and there may be more rollouts since Massachusetts did get their Inflation Reduction Act funding. It may still be available, even if further funding might not be available given the change in administrations. So it's really a question of who can make this happen. Can the city work with Hull Street Energy to help facilitate the transition? Again, the mayor voiced interest in speaking with them, but hasn't yet. We've made several requests to help that meeting happen, and he just hasn't had it in his schedule. Hull Street has said that they are willing to talk with city officials about transition options and see if there's any way that the city and the power plant owners can work together. And we've been offering to work with the city. We have transition experts that we work with in our Mass Clean Peak Coalition. We have access to energy analysts who are currently studying available possible paths and also the public health benefits of decarbonization. And we're willing to introduce interested officials with Hull Street Energy so a discussion can start. And we would love to see this happen. Way that folks in the community can help is contact your city council members or the mayor or both and let them know that you would like to see this happen. You'd like to see Pittsfield Generating have a discussion with the city about how to make a transition work. They're interested in transitioning. They just haven't found a path yet. And I really think that community cooperation might help push that forward. And again, we have a petition that folks can sign. I'll drop that in the chat so you can just grab the link. And I'm happy to do Q&A.
I guess I'll go first. Hi, Rose.
Yeah. Hi.
So I believe, I believe the last time I wrote about this was like earlier this year, maybe or something. So has there been any kind of movement on being able to have that conversation, or right now is it just kind of at a standstill where both parties are like, well, we'll talk, but they haven't talked yet?
Yeah, it seems to be in that place. I mean, everyone sounds willing, but it hasn't moved yet. The mayor said it would be great to have that talk and just apparently hasn't had time. We've tried to have meetings with him as the grant deadlines got closer and closer. And again, he never managed to schedule. So I'm hoping maybe the city council can help as well if he's really that overbooked. One thing the mayor did do is the new Office of Energy Transformation that just started up. It's a new state agency. They started out before they formed, they had conversations with environmental groups, including BEAT. And when we mentioned the work we were doing on peakers, the executive director was like, "That's really interesting." I'll get back to you on that. And a couple of weeks later, she came back and said, "This is one of the main platforms of our office." So decarbonizing peaker plants across the state is now part of what they're working on. And the mayor did agree to be on the advisory committee for that. And Hull Street Energy, the folks from Hull Street Energy are on the advisory committee and the peaker working group. So there is some discussion possible. It's just a very large group. It's not a one-on-one conversation specifically about their plant. It's more of a systems overview of peakers in general. That might change in the future, but it would be great to see this conversation happen at the community level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
If anyone else has any
Does
other questions, yeah, you can put them in the chat. You can just unmute, whatever you prefer.
Rosemary, I'm wondering that one extra lot that you talked about that's the buildings have been taken down. Isn't there slated some buildings to go in there? I think is it Milltown that's doing some building in there?
That's on the lots that are further east.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a solid plan for the ones to the west, and that's a conversation I really need to have with PETA is what the plans are for those lots.
Okay.
Hopefully they're still available because that would be an ideal place to put solar.
Yeah.
And it could
Okay.
avoid a lot of remediation problems rather than trying to put buildings there too. If anyone's interested, I can talk more about the E-Steam power plant option. Let me share screen again. I have some slides on that.
Is that the one
Yeah,
that you mentioned Cambridge is doing?
Yep,
Okay,
yep,
yeah,
they're
I'm gonna
doing
ask
that in
about that.
Cambridge.
and Rose, if you could also talk a little bit, if you have any more ideas or even questions or invitations about incorporating renewable energy and greening energy with environmental tourism, because I think that's a pretty interesting idea.
That I hadn't thought of making them a go-to place, but that is a possibility. Green Energy Consumers Alliance is a really great organization out east, and they have occasionally clean energy tours. And I went to one years ago. Oh, what's the name of the ski area in Charlemont? Is that Berkshire East? I think that's Berkshire East. Yep, yep. They have solar and wind all over the top of the hill, and it was really fascinating to go on a tour of it. And yeah, it would be great to be able to have that sort of draw along with the tourism that we already have coming to town. I was thinking more on an environment, at least it's an environmentally minded city, being a good draw for people who come here for, the nature of the Berkshires. But yeah, energy tourism might be a thing. Boy, that gets me thinking now. Don't get me thinking on live on a live feed. But there are things like small scale wind turbines that are ground mount. They're sort of human sized. That's another possibility as a wind field on some of the brownfields in town. There are a lot of great technologies
Yeah.
that are developing that could be really interesting stuff
Well,
to
now
attract
you've
people.
got me thinking we should talk about this
Yeah,
later.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
All
So,
sorts of
what's
ideas.
going on in Cambridge? It's Vicinity Energy are the owners of the Kendall Station power plant, and it's an old plant, an awful lot like Pittsfield Generating. It's an old combined heat and power that used gas or oil to boil water and then send steam around for district heating and steam supply. And they're transitioning to a system that they call e-steam. It's basically electrode-based electric boiler. So there are two plates that are highly charged and they send water through there and it flash creates steam. And that turns into the high pressure steam that goes through the system. But before that, it goes through a heat pump boiler. And they already have the heat pump boiler installed. I don't think they have the electrodes yet, but they have the heat pump boiler already installed, and that preheats the water to an already fairly high temperature so that they use less energy when it goes into the flash boiler. If it's preheated by a really efficient heat pump system, it takes less electricity to flash boil. And then they also have 800 megawatts planned for molten salt thermal battery storage. So when the water is already warm or any warm water that comes back through the loop, they store that energy and use that to preheat it before it goes to the heat pump and that before it goes to the boiler. So it's a really cool idea. and it's something that might be replicable. One of the things that's a little bit tricky is they're counting on using the Charles River as a bit of a heat sink. Some of the water will go through and it'll come out cooler water. It basically cools the temperature of the river, the way that the system works. So it's not damaging. It's not putting warm water back. It's putting cool water back. But we might not have enough water flow at that point. I'm not sure what the water flow is to Pittsfield Generating, but they do have that steam capacity. But that is one of the things that I would like to see investigated, because that could really provide for some of the clean tech development that they're talking about. And another thing that I didn't get into is what peaker power energy costs us. When the peakers fire up, the cost of electricity goes way up. And there's a reason for that. The market works in the most amazing way. ISO New England has to start by buying from the cheapest possible supplier first. Then when that maxes out, they move to the next most expensive, and then the next most expensive. But every time that that price goes up of the most expensive one, everyone gets paid that price. So source A will be earning what source F makes per megawatt if they are all the way up through F. When the peakers go on and they're really expensive to run, that means the price that's paid to all of those suppliers goes up to that same high level. So it's in our financial interest as well to decarbonize peakers. That's another reason we're interested in doing this.
Fred Perkins asked a question in the chat. I can read it if you'd like.
Yeah.
Fred said, you mentioned hazard from peaker exhaust to Allendale students. Some batteries, lithium ion in particular, are very hazardous when they fail and burn. What is the proper balance between these hazards?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They do have hazards when they burn. The burns are very, very infrequent, far less than the peaker power plant firing up. So there will always be more emissions from a peaker plant over time than the off chance of a battery system catching fire. There are also safer ways to build batteries, and that's becoming more common now, is to make sure that each of the compartments are spaced further apart so that if one section catches, they don't all catch. There are better fire treatments around the base of them to make sure that it doesn't spread through any ground fire. And then there's also, phosphorus. There's batteries with phosphorus added that actually makes them much harder to burn. And yeah, Susan Abrams brought up the iron air batteries, and that's exactly where I was going to go too. One of the interesting things about our power use is as things electrify, as more people get heat pumps and, electrify their cooking and their hot water, is we're more likely to switch over to winter peaks more than summer peaks. Also because heat pumps are more efficient for air conditioning, and those are longer periods of peak, which are better served by iron air batteries that can last for days instead of just hours. Iron air is extremely safe batteries. It basically rusts and unrusts. That's what generates the power. So you're not dealing with all the toxic chemicals of lithium ion batteries. And that's an up and coming market. And I would love to have a chance to talk with Hull Street about whether or not they would want to do that winter peak, or maybe a combo, just a few of the lithium ion and then some of the iron air so that they can serve both types. There are a lot of different options. It says, don't know they're ready for prime time. They are hitting the market. The iron air batteries are hitting the market now. And yeah, there are carbon batteries made from hemp. There are a lot of alternative technologies out there. And in the meantime, they found ways to build lithium ion that's considerably safer than what has been on the market so far.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have, it's kind of a vague question, but in terms of cost to, you know, transform the power plant over, obviously it would probably be it would be on the operator of it, but what would they be looking at in terms of cost?
It, varies widely depending on what kind of system they put in, so it's really hard to ballpark it. Both they and Cogentrix, the owners of the Doreen and Woodland and West Springfield plants, said that the upfront cost isn't what concerns them. It's the cost, it's how much they'll be able to make over the 10 years or so that they invest into it, 10 or 20 years. So they're looking more at how much income possibility they have over time. They said that raising capital for this is not a problem. They're both investor-owned utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Rosemary, you had mentioned the IRA funding. Can you talk a little bit more about what's available through that for this work? Or do you have that information? And what do you think as far as the upcoming administration? I know I've asked other people that, and I've worked on this, and I'm very worried a little bit, except that it is a law, so.
It is a law. It would have to be repealed. How hard they're going to work on it, I couldn't tell you. The one thing that my personal view on this is there's a lot of bluster involved sometimes, so you don't know what is, you know, just talk or what they're actually going to act on. And we don't know exactly when they're going to act on it. So what's going to happen to IRA, I really couldn't tell you for sure.
Right.
There is funding that has come to the state and is now being parsed out. There's I know the office acronym is FFIO, and I can't remember federal funds. Oh, it's a state thing that it's a state agency that basically is figuring out how to spend the IRA funding.
Right.
Some of that is still available. So I don't know what form it will take. It hasn't been fully decided at this point. There's a lot of ideas bouncing around. Berkshire Innovation Center just held a workshop on that. I think I just got the slides and information from that, so we can post that on nofrackedgasinmass.com. That's our website for no frack gas that discusses that more. Like I said, we just missed the deadline this week for a couple of the IRA funding that could have gone into it, but there's still funds floating around. Even if they decided to cancel it, there's still some funding around.
Great. Yeah, I would think with the EJ piece, with the environmental justice piece, that's a big piece. So
That's what most of it is geared to. That's
Yeah.
also how we got our funding for our Breathe Easy Berkshires program. Our air quality monitoring program was an EPA grant, but it was IRA money. And it was basically to look at EJ communities and how they can reduce pollution for better health outcomes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of those projects were put in red states, so
Yeah.
really hoping that that will keep it on the boards.
Yeah, hopefully people will realize that, they're really good funding opportunities. And also renewables are much more on par with fossil fuels. They're becoming more profitable in a lot of areas. They're certainly on par, if not more profitable at this point. So I saw one analyst talk about, the possible change in policies, and they said the problem is the market is going to drive it, and the market is now in favor of renewables. So even if supports go away, there's probably still a strong support for renewables.
I hope so. Yeah.
Oh, me too.
I just dropped the No Fracked Gas and Mass website in the chat, and there are a ton of resources on there to help people just learn more and stay up to date, and take action. John, a program associate who's on this call, I believe, does a fantastic job of updating that and keeping it updated. So definitely check it out. And
John does a great news capsule every month, and with a great introductory write-up. If you look in the news tab, it'll be there. And he also manages the comment period section. What's going on with all the new climate laws that have been passed in the last few years is now regulations need to be retooled to fit those new laws. So there are a lot of comment periods from the state. And that comment periods page shows you what comment periods are open, how you can make comments, what the subject's about. And John does a great job of managing that as well.
I just put the page to subscribe to that in the chat also if anyone's interested.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
If anyone else has any other questions, we still have time. Again, feel free to unmute, put it in the chat. And if not, we can end it a little early. But thank you so much, Rose. This was great. And
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Great work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. Bye-bye.
thank you.
Come on, thank you so much, Rosemary.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.